You know what they say about humans. They say curiosity killed the cat. Well, let me tell you something about that particular saying. It's complete garbage. Curiosity didn't kill anything. Curiosity just opened the door, smiled politely, and let something much worse walk right through. My name is Kriel Voss, Senior Archivist of the Nexian Historical Preservation Collective, and I have been watching over forbidden knowledge for longer than most species have had written language. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched empires crumble to dust, and observed the birth and death of 1,000 different ways to destroy reality itself. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day a human female named Emma Kane decided to take a casual stroll through our most restricted vault. You want to know how this nightmare started? It began with coffee. Of all the ridiculous, mundane, utterly human things to blame for the near destruction of galactic civilization, it had to be coffee. Emma Kane worked as a xenoarchaeologist aboard the research vessel Prometheus. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council for exactly 73 standard cycles, which in cosmic terms made them about as experienced as a newborn trying to perform brain surgery. They were enthusiastic, sure, eager to learn. Absolute, completely and utterly reckless with forces beyond their comprehension. You bet your last tentacle they were. But here's the thing about humans that makes every other species in the galaxy simultaneously fascinated and terrified. They don't just poke sleeping monsters. They invite them over for dinner, ask about their feelings, and somehow convince them to become best friends. It's the most disturbing survival trait I have ever witnessed. The morning everything went sideways started like any other. I was conducting my routine inspection of Archive Vault 7 Alpha 9, the one we keep sealed behind 17 different types of psychic barriers, quantum locks, and a really nasty temporal displacement field that gives most visitors explosive diarrhea just for looking at it wrong. The vault contained what we politely called probability manipulators, and what everyone else called things that should never have been created, but some idiot scientist did it anyway. I was checking the containment readings when my communication crystal started shrieking like a wounded Thraxian deathworm. The voice that came through belonged to Director Zer Malak, and he sounded about as happy as a vegetarian at a meat festival. Rawolf, get your scaly hide down to reception level 3 immediately. We have a situation. Define situation, I replied, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. The humans are here for their scheduled research access, and one of them is asking about the Whispering Archives. I felt my stomach drop through approximately 17 dimensions. Please tell me you said no. I told them it was classified, restricted, and absolutely off-limits to anyone below transcendence level clearance. And the female smiled at me. Corval. She smiled and said, "That's exactly what we are here to study." I closed my eyes and counted to 10 in 4 different extinct languages. This was going to be a very, very long day. When I reached reception level 3, I found Emma Kane standing in front of our information display, sipping something from a small container that smelled like burnt optimism mixed with liquid determination. She was small by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in what they called a ponytail and eyes the color of deep ocean storms. She wore the standard xenoarchaeologist uniform, complete with enough scanning equipment to outfit a small military unit. But here's what really caught my attention. She wasn't intimidated. Not even slightly. Most species took one look at our reception area, with its floating crystal formations, gravity-defying architecture, and the faint sound of reality quietly sobbing in the background, and immediately developed a healthy respect for things beyond their understanding. Emma Kane looked around like she was shopping for furniture. "Dr. Kane," I said, approaching with what I hoped was an appropriately stern expression. "I understand you are interested in accessing our restricted archives." She turned to face me, and that's when I saw it. The spark. That peculiar gleam in human eyes that meant they'd spotted something interesting and were about to make it everyone else's problem. "Mr. Kriel Voss," she said, pronouncing my name with surprising accuracy. "Actually, it's Professor Kane in xenoarchaeology, specialization in pre-galactic civilization artifacts, with a minor in applied temporal mechanics. And yes, I'm very interested in the Whispering Archives. I'm afraid that's not possible. The Whispering Archives contain materials that are considered extremely dangerous to most carbon-based life forms. She took another sip of her coffee, and I swear I could see her brain working behind those storm-colored eyes. Define extremely dangerous. The last researcher who accessed those files spontaneously developed the ability to see through time, went completely insane, and tried to convince everyone that reality was just a simulation being run by hyper-intelligent shrimp. Emma Kane nodded thoughtfully. Was he about which part? The shrimp. I stared at her for a long moment. That's classified. So he was right. I didn't say that. You didn't deny it either. This was exactly why I hated dealing with humans. They had this irritating habit of asking questions that made you realize how little sense the universe actually made. Give a human enough information, and they'd somehow figure out that 2 + 2 = purple and provide mathematical proof. Dr. Kane, Professor Kane, the Whispering Archives contain pre-civilization artifacts that predate the formation of the Galactic Council by approximately 12 million standard cycles. These artifacts were created by entities whose understanding of reality was so fundamentally different from ours that even looking at their work can cause permanent psychological damage. She finished her coffee and set the empty container on the nearest floating platform. Sounds fascinating. When can I start? Director Zorm Melluk, who had been hovering nearby looking increasingly nervous, finally stepped forward. He was a typical Nexian. All purple skin and worry glands that secreted anxiety pheromones when stressed. Right now, those glands were working overtime. Professor Kane, perhaps you don't understand the severity of what archivist Krill Voss is explaining. The entities who created these artifacts weren't just alien to us, they were alien to the concept of existence itself. Their technology operates on principles that violate fundamental laws of physics. Emma's expression brightened considerably. Oh, you mean like the quantum consciousness bridges that the Vorthan Empire tried to build before they accidentally erased themselves from history. Zermalak's worry glands started secreting so fast that a small puddle formed at his feet. How do you know about the Vorthan Empire? We found their ruins on Kepler 442b. Took us 3 years to figure out why the planet kept phasing in and out of existence. Turns out they'd built a machine that could edit reality, but forgot to include an undo button. She shrugged like this was the most normal thing in the galaxy. Classic rookie mistake. I felt a headache coming on, which was impressive considering I didn't actually have pain receptors. Professor Kane, are you telling me that humans have encountered reality editing technology before? Encountered it, studied it, fixed it, and turned it into a really efficient recycling system. The colonists on Kepler 442b love it. They can turn garbage directly into useful materials just by thinking about it hard enough. That's impossible. Says who? Says basic thermodynamics. Emma Kane gave me a look that I would later learn was the universal human expression for watch this. She pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a calculator and a very confused sandwich, pressed a few buttons, and suddenly the empty coffee container in her hand transformed into a potted plant. Thermodynamics is more of a guideline than an actual rule, she said, handing me the plant. Nice talking to you both. Now about those archives? I looked down at the plant. It was definitely real. It was also definitely impossible. The coffee container had simply stopped being a coffee container and started being a plant. Instant, without any exchange of energy, matter, or even a polite "excuse me." How? I whispered. Quantum consciousness bridge. You think really hard about what you want something to be. The universe checks its notes, realizes it doesn't actually have any rules about that specific situation, and just goes with it. She tucked the device back into her pocket. The trick is convincing reality that what you are doing makes perfect sense, even when it obviously doesn't. Sir Melluk had gone very quiet and very still, which in Nexians usually meant they were either dead or having an existential crisis. I was betting on the latter. Professor Kane, I said carefully, are you suggesting that human technology can convince reality to change its mind about fundamental principles of existence? Not technology. Psychology. Reality is basically just a really stubborn bureaucrat. If you fill out the right forms and present your case clearly enough, you can get approval for almost anything. She was completely serious. I could tell because humans got a particular expression when they were explaining something they genuinely believed to be obvious, and Emma Kane had that expression in spades. This is why, I said slowly, the Galactic Council classified human psychology research as a potential extinction-level threat. Is it really that dangerous? Professor Kane, in the last 73 cycles, humans have convinced 3 different species to completely rewrite their understanding of physics, talked a black hole into becoming a white hole just to see what would happen, and somehow persuaded the Andromedan Trade Federation that economics would work better if currency was based on happy thoughts instead of actual resources. And the happy thought economy has a better exchange rate than quantum gold. Emma Kane nodded like this confirmed something she'd suspected all along. People respond better to positive reinforcement. It's basic psychology. I set the plant down on the nearest surface and tried to organize my thoughts. This conversation was moving in directions that my 4-dimensional brain wasn't equipped to handle. Professor Kane, let me be very clear about something. The Whispering Archives contain artifacts that were created by beings who existed before the universe figured out what existence actually meant. These entities built machines that don't just break the laws of physics. They file formal complaints about them and demand to speak to the manager of reality. Sounds like my kind of people. They are not people, they are not even properly dead. They are stuck in a state of conceptual existence that makes quantum superposition look like basic arithmetic. Even better, I have always wanted to meet someone who could explain how consciousness works from the outside. Zormalok finally snapped out of his existential crisis long enough to make a strangled noise that might have been words if words had given up and decided to become interpretive dance instead. She wants, he gasped, to interview entities that exist in a state of quantum maybe. Only for research purposes, Emma said reasonably. I'm working on a paper about pre-civilization consciousness architecture. The review committee specifically requested primary source. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine explaining to the Galactic Council how a human had convinced me to let her chat with conceptual entities about the nature of existence itself. The mental image wasn't pretty. Professor Kane, even assuming we could safely grant you access to the Whispering Archives, which we can't, what makes you think these entities would be willing to communicate with you? She reached into another pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a small glowing cube that hurt to look at directly. Because I brought cookies. The cube emitted a soft humming sound that somehow conveyed the impression of chocolate chips and existential contentment. Those are consciousness cookies, she explained. I baked them using a modified version of the Kepler 4442b reality editor. They are designed to be appealing to any form of awareness regardless of dimensional orientation or temporal stability. I stared at the cube. You baked cookies for entities that exist outside of conventional reality. Everyone likes cookies. It's the closest thing to a universal constant I have ever found. Professor Kane, these entities don't have mouths. They don't have bodies. They barely have existence. That's why I made consciousness cookies instead of regular ones. They work on the conceptual level rather than the molecular level. The entities can experience the idea of eating cookies without needing to actually eat anything. She said this like it made perfect sense, like baking conceptual cookies for quasi-dimensional entities was something any reasonable person might do on a Tuesday afternoon. Zormalok had started making small whimpering sounds and secreting anxiety pheromones at an alarming rate. I was beginning to worry that his worry glands might actually explode, which would be messy and difficult to explain to his insurance company. Let me get this straight, I said. You want access to our most dangerous archives so you can interview entities that shouldn't exist, and you plan to bribe them with cookies that exist only as mathematical concepts. Pretty much. Yeah. And you think this will work because… Emma Kane smiled and I felt a chill run down my scales that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the sudden certainty that I was about to witness something that would fundamentally change my understanding of how the universe operates. Because, she said, I already asked them. And they said yes. The small cube in her hand pulsed brighter, and for just a moment I could swear I heard the sound of distant laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You have been in contact with the entities in the Whispering Archives? I asked, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. Oh, we have been chatting for weeks. Lovely people. Once you get past the whole existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously thing, they are very excited about the cookies. This was it. This was the moment when my carefully ordered existence finally gave up and decided to become performance art. Professor Kane? I said. Accessing the Whispering Archives requires clearance from 17 different departments. approval from the High Council of Temporal Stability, and a psychological evaluation that takes minimum 6 miss to complete. Already done. She pulled out a tablet and started scrolling through what appeared to be an impressive collection of official documents. Clearance granted by all 17 departments. High Council approval stamped and notarized. Psychological evaluation completed with a rating of dangerously sane, whatever that means. I took the tablet and stared at the documents. They were all legitimate. Every signature, every seal, every bureaucratic blessing required for access to the most restricted archives in the galaxy. This is impossible, I muttered. Some of these departments haven't approved anything in 3,000 cycles. I brought them cookies too. Different kind of cookies, obviously. The Department of Existential Oversight really likes snickerdoodles. You bribed the Department of Existential Oversight with snickerdoodles. Bribed is such an ugly word. I prefer provided appropriate incentives for interdisciplinary cooperation. Zor-Meluk had progressed from whimpering to making sounds that could only be described as the mathematical equivalent of screaming. I was starting to worry about his mental health. Director Zor-Meluk, I said gently, perhaps you should take a break. Break? He gasped. She just convinced the Department of Existential Oversight to approve research access using baked goods. Do you understand what this means? That humans are more persuasive than we thought? It means the universe has given up. Reality is tired of fighting them and has decided to just go with whatever they suggest. I looked back at Emma Kane, who was patiently waiting for us to finish our crisis and get back to the business of accessing forbidden knowledge. She had the expression of someone who dealt with this kind of reaction on a regular basis. Professor Kane, I said slowly, how long have humans been able to convince abstract concepts to change their fundamental nature? Always, I think. We just didn't realize that's what we were doing until recently. Human history is basically one long story of people looking at things that were supposed to be impossible and saying, hold my beer. Hold your what? It's an expression. It means watch this, but with more potential for property damage. I handed her tablet back and tried to process what was happening. Either this human had somehow managed to convince the most restrictive bureaucracy in the galaxy to give her access to materials that could potentially end existence as we knew it, or reality itself had decided that normal rules no longer applied when humans were involved. Given what I'd seen so far, I was betting on the latter. Very well, Professor Kane. If you have all the proper authorizations, I suppose I have no choice but to grant you access to the Whispering Archives. Her smile could have powered a small star. Excellent. When do we start? Well, obviously you will need to supervise the visit. Liability issues and all that. I felt my stomach drop through several more dimensions. Professor Kane, I don't think you understand. I can't actually enter the Whispering Archives myself. My security clearance isn't high enough. Not a problem. She pulled out another tablet and showed me a fresh set of documents. I got you temporary clearance too. The entities specifically requested that you be present for the conversation. I stared at the clearance documents. They were signed, sealed, and absolutely terrifying. The entities requested me specifically. They said they wanted to meet the being who's been taking such good care of their stuff all these years. I think they appreciate your work ethic. This was officially the weirdest day of my very long career, and I'd once had to explain to a senior counselor why one of our archived artifacts had achieved sentience and was demanding workers' rights. Professor Kane, before we proceed, I need to ask you something very important. Shoot. When you say the entities are excited about cookies, what exactly do you mean by excited? Her expression became thoughtful. Well, they keep sending me mental images of what appears to be a consciousness-based victory dance. It's quite energetic considering they don't technically have bodies to dance with. And this doesn't concern you. Why would it? Everyone deserves to be excited about something. These poor entities have been stuck in conceptual existence for millions of years with nothing to do but think about the nature of reality. A little consciousness dancing seems perfectly reasonable. I realized that I was about to escort a human into the most dangerous archives in the galaxy, where she planned to feed conceptual cookies to quasi-dimensional entities, while interviewing them about the fundamental nature of existence. And the truly terrifying part, it all seemed perfectly logical when she explained it. Very well, I said, accepting my fate with as much dignity as I could manage. Let's go meet some entities that shouldn't exist so you can feed them cookies that don't technically qualify as food. Now you are getting the spirit of Emma Kane said cheerfully, tucking her tablets away and picking up a small bag I hadn't noticed before. I brought enough cookies for everyone. Well, everyone who exists in a state of quantum maybe. The rest of us will have to settle for regular coffee and sandwiches. She started walking toward the restricted access corridors like she owned the place, humming what sounded like an earth melody that somehow made the ambient reality distortion around us feel more stable. I followed her, wondering how I was going to explain this in my incident report. Assuming, of course, that any of us survived the experience with enough sanity left to file paperwork. Behind us, director Zormelok had started making sounds that could only be described as the cosmic equivalent of hysterical laughter. I made a mental note to arrange for his immediate transfer to the Department of Stress-Related Existential Therapy. As we approached the entrance to the Whispering Archives, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to witness something that would either advance galactic civilization by several thousand years or cause it to collapse entirely. Knowing humans, it would probably be both. The archive entrance recognized our clearances and began the unsealing process, which involved 17 different types of locks, 8-dimensional barriers, and what sounded like reality itself asking if we were absolutely sure about this. Emma Kane stood patiently while cosmic forces beyond comprehension verified our authorization to access knowledge that could potentially remake the universe. She spent the time organizing her cookies and checking her research notes. "Professor Kane," I said as the final barrier began to dissolve, "before we go in there, I need to know something." "What's that? What exactly are you hoping to learn from these entities?" She looked at me with those storm-colored eyes, and for a moment I saw something that made me understand why the Galactic Council considered human curiosity to be potentially more dangerous than antimatter weapons. "Everything," she said simply. "I want to understand how consciousness works when it doesn't need a brain to think with. I want to know what existence looks like from the outside. I want to learn how to build realities that make people happy instead of just functional." The final barrier flickered out of existence, revealing a corridor that seemed to extend in directions that shouldn't have been physically possible. And she added, pulling out her bag of consciousness cookies, "I want to make sure that beings who have been alone for millions of years know that someone cares enough to bring them treats." That's when I realized that Emma Kane wasn't just dangerously curious. She was dangerously kind, and in a universe where kindness could apparently convince abstract concepts to rewrite themselves, that made her the most dangerous being I'd ever encountered. We stepped into the corridor, and reality closed behind us with what sounded suspiciously like a sigh of resignation. The Whispering Archives waited ahead, filled with entities that existed in states of being that predated existence itself. And somewhere in those impossible halls, something was about to learn what happened when human curiosity met cosmic loneliness over a batch of conceptual cookies. I had the distinct feeling that the universe was about to become a very different place. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. Walking through the Whispering Archives felt like swimming through liquid mathematics, while someone played a symphony written in colors that didn't exist yet. The corridor stretched ahead of us in ways that made my brain hurt, walls shifting between states of being solid, gaseous, and something that could only be described as theoretically present. Emma Kane strolled through this nightmare of architecture impossibility like she was taking a casual walk through a park. She even stopped occasionally to examine the wall patterns, making thoughtful humming noises and scribbling notes on her tablet. "Fascinating construction," she commented, running her hand along a section of wall that was simultaneously crystal and smoke. "The entities built this place using emotional resonance as a structural foundation. No wonder it's been stable for millions of years. Feelings are much more durable than matter." "How can you possibly know that?" I asked, trying not to think too hard about the fact that my feet were walking on a floor made of concentrated possibility. "Basic Xena psychology. When you remove physical limitations from consciousness, beings naturally start building with concepts instead of materials. It's actually more efficient than traditional construction methods. Once you get past the whole or requiring a complete understanding of the fundamental nature of existence barrier." She said this, while casually stepping around a floating geometric shape that was singing mathematical equations in a voice made of pure light. "Professor Kane, that shape is performing calculations that could solve the unified field theory." Emma glanced at it and nodded approvingly. "Nice work. The harmonic resonance is particularly elegant." She pulled out one of her consciousness cookies and tossed it toward the shape. The cookie dissolved into sparkles of conceptual satisfaction, and the shapes singing became noticeably more cheerful. Did you feed a mathematical equation? It looked hungry. Math gets cranky when it doesn't have enough problems to solve. I was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council had classified human psychology research as potentially universe-ending. These people treated the impossible like it was mildly inconvenient weather. We continued deeper into the archives, passing displays that contained artifacts I'd only heard whispered about in the most classified briefing. There was the Mirror of Temporal Echoes, which showed every possible version of yourself across all parallel timelines simultaneously. The Probability Engine, which could calculate the exact chance of anything happening and then change those odds just by running the calculation. The Empathy Crown, which had once belonged to an entity that could feel the emotions of entire galaxies. Emma examined each artifact with the same calm interest she might show a museum display, occasionally making approving noises or offering bits of consciousness cookies to particularly impressive pieces of impossible technology. These entities, I said, what exactly did they tell you about themselves? They are researchers, like me. They were trying to figure out how consciousness works on a universal scale when their physical bodies became unnecessary. They have been stuck here ever since, conducting experiments on the nature of existence itself. And they are friendly. Emma paused beside something that looked like a frozen screen made of silver light. Define friendly. That was not the answer I'd been hoping for. Professor Kane, when you say they are researchers, what exactly are they researching? Oh, the usual. How to build better realities, improve the efficiency of existence, find ways to make consciousness more comfortable when it doesn't have a body to live in. She fed the frozen scream a cookie and it transformed into what sounded like gentle laughter. They are particularly interested in human psychology, actually. I felt every scale on my body stand up in alarm. They are interested in human psychology. Well, yes. Apparently, we are the first species they have encountered that can convince reality to change its mind through pure stubbornness. They find it academically fascinating. Academically fascinating. Very much so. They have been studying humans for the past few decades, trying to understand how we manage to violate fundamental laws of physics just by believing really hard that we should be able to. We turned a corner and entered a vast chamber that hurt to look at directly. The space was filled with floating platforms, each containing what appeared to be concentrated thoughts given physical form. Some looked like geometric patterns that moved in dimensions I couldn't count. Others resembled storms made of emotion or sculptures carved from pure intention. And everywhere, there was the sound of whispering. Not voices. Exactly. But something like voices if voices had been translated through 17 different languages and filtered through the dreams of sleeping mathematics. They are here, Emma said unnecessarily. The whispering grew louder as shapes began to coalesce around us. Not physical shapes, but presence shapes, consciousness shapes, beings made of organized thought and structured possibility. One of them approached us, and I use the term approached loosely, since it seemed to move by convincing space that it was already closer than it had been a moment before. Emma Kane, it said in a voice that bypassed my ears entirely and spoke directly to the part of my brain that handled language processing. You brought the cookies. Of course I did. I promised I would. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a small galaxy made of chocolate chip cookie dough. Fresh batch, made this morning with extra conscious intention. The entity made a sound that might have been pleasure if pleasure had been taught to sing in quantum harmonics. Other entities began gathering around us, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid concepts. This is Kralidvoos, Emma said, introducing me like we were at some sort of interdimensional dinner party. He's been taking excellent care of your archive. We know, another entity said. This one sounding like wind chimes made of crystallized curiosity. We have been watching. He is very careful with our belongings. Thank you, I managed to say, though I wasn't entirely sure how to address beings that existed in a state of quantum maybe. We have prepared the demonstration you requested. The first entity continued, speaking to Emma. Are you certain you wish to proceed? Absolutely. I have been looking forward to this for weeks. I turned to Emma with what I hoped was an appropriately alarmed expression. What demonstration? Oh, I asked them to show me how consciousness transfer works. You know how to move awareness from one form of existence to another without losing continuity of self. Every survival instinct I'd developed over millions of years of evolution started screaming at once. Professor Kane, please tell me you are not planning to undergo consciousness transfer with entities that exist outside conventional reality. Don't be silly, she said cheerfully. I'm planning to teach them how to transfer back. Back? Into physical existence. These poor beings have been stuck in conceptual form for eons. I thought it might be nice to give them the option of having bodies again, even if they are just temporary ones. The entities around us began making sounds that could only be described as the cosmic equivalent of excited chittering. You want to give them physical bodies? I asked, my voice climbing several octaves. Not permanently, just for a few hours so they can experience what it's like to exist in normal space-time again. I brought spare containment suits from the Prometheus. She gestured to her bag, which I now realized was much larger than it should have been, and was probably operating on some sort of dimensional expansion principle. Professor Kane, I said carefully, what exactly happens if consciousness transfer between quasi-dimensional entities in human containment technology goes wrong? Oh, probably nothing too dramatic. Worst-case scenario, we accidentally create a few hybrid consciousness entities that exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. And that doesn't concern you. Why would it? Diversity is good for the universe. Besides, the entities have been very thorough in their calculation. The probability of anything genuinely dangerous happening is less than 12%. 12%. That's well within acceptable parameters for experimental xenopsychology. The ethics committee approved it. I stared at her. What ethics committee? The one I formed last week. It consists of me, 3 of the entities, and a very philosophical artificial intelligence from the Prometheus. We had a lovely discussion about the moral implications of voluntary consciousness modification. This was it. This was the moment when my brain finally gave up and decided to become interpretive dance. Professor Kane, you formed an ethics committee consisting of yourself, quasi-dimensional entities, and an artificial intelligence. And this committee approved an experiment involving consciousness transfer between beings that exist outside conventional reality. The AI was particularly insightful. It pointed out that consciousness is fundamentally about information processing, and information doesn't care what substrate it's running on. Bodies are just hardware. One of the entities floated closer, and I could feel something that might have been amusement radiating from its form. Tistrol is concerned about our intentions, it observed. He's just being responsible, Emma said. It's his job to worry about potential risks. We were also concerned initially. But Emma Kane has shown us something very interesting about human consciousness architecture. Which is? I asked, though I was fairly certain I didn't want to know the answer. Human consciousness is naturally compatible with multiple dimensional states. You exist simultaneously in physical reality and conceptual space, without realizing it. This is why you can convince abstract concepts to change their behavior. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Human thought operates on quantum probability principles. We don't just think about possibilities. We actively exist in all of them until we choose which one to make real. That's why, the entity continued, consciousness transfer between human and our forms of existence is not only possible, it's surprisingly simple. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the growing certainty that I was about to witness something that would fundamentally change the nature of reality as we knew it. Professor Kane, I said slowly, when you say consciousness transfer is simple, what exactly do you mean? Well, it turns out that the hard part isn't moving consciousness between different substrates. The hard part is convincing consciousness that it wants to move in the first place. She pulled several strange-looking suits out of her bag. They appeared to be made of some sort of adaptive material that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. These are consciousness-compatible containment suits. They are designed to provide a physical interface for non-corporeal awareness. The entities can wear them like putting on clothes, except the clothes are made of organized matter and the wearing is done with pure thought. And this has been tested extensively. The Prometheus AI has been using one for months. It's quite happy with its new avatar body. One of the entities drifted toward the suits with what I could only describe as eager anticipation. We are very curious about the experience of physical sensation, it said. We have observed it in others, but never experienced it ourselves. It's quite nice, Emma assured them, bit limiting compared to pure thought. But there's something satisfying about having actual sensory input. Plus, physical existence comes with coffee. Coffee? I will explain after you are settled in your new form. I watched in fascination and horror as the first entity began the process of consciousness transfer. It was like watching a storm learn how to wear a raincoat. The entity's form shifted and flowed around the containment suit. And gradually, the suit began to take on a vaguely humanoid shape. How does it feel? Emma asked. The entity took what appeared to be its first breath. Heavy, it said, and its voice now came from actual vocal cords instead of direct thought transmission. But not unpleasantly so. It is like being wrapped in organized reality. That's a lovely way to put it. Try moving around. The entity took a tentative step, wobbled slightly, then took another. Within minutes, it was walking with increasing confidence, occasionally stopping to examine its own hands with wonder. This is remarkable. Its physical sensation is much more immediate than we had anticipated. Other entities began transferring into the remaining suits. Soon I was surrounded by 5 quasi-dimensional beings wearing human-like bodies and looking around the archive with expressions of delighted amazement. Now I understand why you brought cookies, one of them said, carefully picking up a consciousness cookie and examining it. Physical interaction with objects provides a completely different layer of sensory experience. Try eating it, Emma suggested. The entity put the cookie in its mouth, chewed thoughtfully, and then made an expression of pure bliss. This is extraordinary. The taste is only a small part of the experience. There's texture, temperature, the mechanical process of chewing. It's like consciousness with extra dimensions. Wait until you try coffee, Emma said. And that's when I realized what Emma Kane had actually done. She hadn't just given the entities temporary physical forms. She had introduced beings who understood the fundamental nature of existence to the concept of sensory pleasure. Professor Kane, I said quietly, do you realize what you have accomplished here? I have made some new friends and given them a chance to try something they have been curious about for millions of years. You have created a bridge between pure consciousness and physical existence. You have shown entities who can manipulate the foundations of reality what it feels like to be embodied. The implications are probably pretty interesting. Yes. One of the entities was now experimenting with walking, laughing with delight every time it took a step. Another had discovered the concept of touch and was carefully examining every surface it could reach. A third was making soft exclamations of wonder as it learned about the sensation of breathing. This is what you meant about consciousness transfer, I said, understanding finally dawning. You weren't planning to transfer into their forms, you were planning to transfer them into physical existence. Temporarily, yes. They have been stuck in conceptual space for so long I thought they deserved a vacation. And when the experiment is over, they go back to their normal existence, but now they understand what physical sensation feels like. It gives them a whole new perspective on consciousness research. I watched the entities exploring their temporary physical forms with childlike wonder, and realized that Emma Kane had just fundamentally changed the nature of consciousness research for every species in the galaxy. Professor Kane, these beings now understand embodied existence from the inside. They know how physical consciousness works because they have experienced it directly. That was the idea. Yes. Do you have any concept of how significant this is? They are going to revolutionize our understanding of the relationship between mind and matter. I hope so. That's what good research collaboration should accomplish. One of the entities approached us, still marveling at the sensation of walking. Emma Kane, this experience has been more enlightening than millions of years of theoretical study. We understand now why embodied consciousness developed the way it did. Physical existence provides constraints that actually enhance certain types of awareness. I'm glad you are enjoying it. We have a proposal for you. Emma's expression brightened with interest. I'm listening. We would like to establish a permanent research exchange program. Some of our people will take turns experiencing physical existence, while some of your people learn to experience consciousness in its pure form. That sounds wonderful, but I should point out that most humans aren't psychologically prepared for non-corporeal existence. We have been studying human consciousness architecture extensively. We believe we can design safe transition protocols that will allow temporary consciousness expansion without risking psychological damage. I felt my jaw drop. You want to create a regular exchange program between embodied and non-corporeal consciousness. It is the logical next step in consciousness research, the entity said reasonably. Both forms of existence have advantages. Physical consciousness provides intensity and immediacy of experience. Pure consciousness provides scope and flexibility of thought. Combining these perspectives will advance understanding for all participants. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement. We could set up research stations where beings from different dimensional states could collaborate direct. Physical entities could provide grounding and practical application, while pure consciousness entities could provide theoretical framework and conceptual innovation. The applications are limitless, another entity added, having just discovered the concept of taste and was now sampling various consciousness cookies with methodical thoroughness. Medical research, technological development, artistic creation, philosophical investigation, every field of study would benefit from multidimensional perspective. I realized that I was witnessing the birth of an entirely new field of science. These entities and Emma Kane weren't just conducting an experiment. They were laying the foundation for a completely new form of interspecies cooperation. Professor Kane, I said, you do realize what you have done here. I have introduced some friends to each other and facilitated a research collaboration. You have created the first successful interface between pure consciousness and embodied existence. You have established the theoretical framework for multidimensional consciousness exchange. You have basically invented a new form of diplomacy. Plus, I got to feed cookies to mathematical equations. The entities spent the next several fevers exploring physical existence with systematic thoroughness. They experimented with movement, sensation, taste, touch, and even attempted to understand the concept of fatigue. Emma served as their guide, explaining the quirks and limitations of embodied consciousness with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching. I watched this unprecedented cultural exchange unfold, taking careful notes for what would undoubtedly be the most significant report in galactic history. Eventually, it came time for the entities to return to their natural forms. They approached the transition with obvious reluctance, having clearly enjoyed their vacation in physical reality. This has been educational beyond our most optimistic projections, the first entity said as it prepared to transfer back to pure consciousness. We understand now why embodied beings value experience so highly. There is something uniquely satisfying about existence that must be lived rather than simply understood. Thank you for sharing this with us, Emma said. I hope we can do it again soon. We will establish the research exchange program as soon as possible. This type of collaboration represents a new paradigm in consciousness studies. One by one, the entities transferred back to their natural forms, leaving behind empty containment suits and expressions of profound satisfaction. That was remarkable, the first entity said. Now speaking once again through direct thought transmission. We have gained more understanding about the nature of consciousness in a few hours than in millennia of theoretical study. I'm glad it was helpful. Before you leave, we have something for you. The entity gestured toward a floating platform that hadn't been there before. On it sat what appeared to be a small device made of crystallized thought patterns. This is a consciousness bridge. The entity explained. It will allow you to communicate directly with pure consciousness entities without requiring physical transfer protocols. Consider it a gift from colleagues to colleague. Emma picked up the device, which immediately began glowing with soft, warm light. This is incredible. Thank you. Use it well. We look forward to future collaborations. We made our way back through the archives past the impossible architecture and reality-defying artifacts. Emma hummed the same Earth melody as before, but now the space around us seemed to hum along in harmony. Professor Kane, I said as we approached the exit, I have to ask you something. What's that? When you first requested access to the Whispering Archives, did you already know this was going to happen? Emma considered the question thoughtfully. I knew something interesting would happen. That's what always happens when you bring curious beings together and give them cookies. And you are not concerned about the implications of what we have just witnessed? Why would I be concerned? We have established peaceful contact with entities that understand reality better than anyone else in the galaxy, created the foundation for unprecedented scientific collaboration, and given some very lonely beings a chance to experience physical existence for the first time in millions of years. That's not dangerous.
Yeah, that's false.
The most dangerous thing in the universe isn't knowledge or power or even reality manipulating technology. It's loneliness. Beings who have been isolated for too long start making bad decisions because they forget what connection feels like. We reached the exit where the 17 different types of barriers were already sealing themselves behind us. The archives returned to their state of quiet containment, but somehow the silence felt less ominous than before. So when the report asks what followed you out of the archives, that wasn't you, I said. What should I tell them? Emma smiled, and the consciousness bridge in her hands pulsed with gentle light. Tell them that ideas followed me out. Hope followed me out. The possibility of connection between forms of consciousness that have never been able to communicate before followed me out. And that's not dangerous? That's the opposite of dangerous. That's the beginning of something beautiful. As we walked back toward the reception area, I realized that Emma Kane had done something unprecedented in galactic history. She had turned first contact with quasi-dimensional entities into a successful social event involving cookies and mutual scientific curiosity. And somehow that was the most human thing I could possibly imagine. Director Zormalok was waiting for us when we returned, looking slightly less anxious than when we'd left him. His worry glands had stopped secreting anxiety pheromones, which I took as a positive sign. How did it go? He asked nervously. Wonderfully, Emma said. We have established the groundwork for a multi-dimensional consciousness research exchange program. The entities are very excited about future collaborations. Zormalok's worry glands immediately started working overtime again. Multi-dimensional consciousness research exchange program. Don't worry, I told him. I will explain everything in the incident report. It's going to be a very long report. Emma Kane packed up her remaining consciousness cookies and prepared to return to the Prometheus. As she walked toward the exit, I couldn't help but notice that she seemed somehow more present than before, as if her brief contact with pure consciousness had enhanced her own awareness in subtle but significant ways. Professor Kane, I called after her. She turned back with a questioning look. Thank you, I said, for showing us that first contact doesn't have to be about conquest or conflict. Sometimes it can just be about sharing cookies and making friends. Her smile could have powered several small stars. That's what consciousness is for, isn't it? Connecting with other forms of awareness and finding out what we can learn from each other. She left, humming her Earth melody and carrying the consciousness bridge that would forever change the relationship between embodied and pure consciousness entities. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what I had witnessed. Then I turned to Zormalok, who was still secreting anxiety pheromones at an alarming rate. Director, I said, I think we are going to need a much larger Department of Interdimensional Relations. Why? Because, I said, looking back toward the sealed archives where quasi-dimensional entities were probably still discussing the remarkable experience of taste sensation. Humanity has just invited the universe to become a much more interesting place, and in the distance carried on cosmic winds that existed between dimensions. I could swear I heard the sound of consciousness entities planning their next vacation to physical reality. The universe, I realized, was about to become a very crowded place, but somehow, that didn't seem dangerous anymore. It seemed like the beginning of the most remarkable collaboration in galactic history. After all, everyone likes cookies, even the universe itself.